Hello, my name's Deah and Merry, also known as Deah. I'm an Indonesian Pakistani non-binary lesbian.
I am Mary Anna Salem, aka Mary. I'm a Lebanese Aboriginal bisexual woman.
We're two writers who love movies, television and books, especially when they're gay.
And welcome to Gay V Club, where we'll be talking about LGBT texts.
That we like, that we don't like, and how we relate to these texts as gay people of colour.
Woo!
What's up?
What's up? I just want to offer an explanation to the lateness of this episode because it's not as serious as anyone might be thinking. I'm just terrible at time management.
I just did a vague tweet about personal circumstances.
Yep. Well, I just want to say that those personal circumstances is that I can't manage time. I don't know what that is, and I do my best, and sometimes I get overwhelmed and... But anyway, we're here now. We're here now is the important thing.
Yes, thank you. But yeah, if you can forgive Mary for her poor time management skills, please like, subscribe, rate, leave a nice review to Gay V Club. We post our updates on Twitter and Instagram, so if Mary ever has poor time management skills again, that's where you'll find out.
It's funny you say again like it's not constantly happening, but like...
Also, we do have a Patreon at patreon.com/gayvclub if you're interested in supporting us and getting like bonus episodes and stuff.
We have some sick bonus eps already up.
For today's episode, a few months back on Twitter, I asked you guys if there were any particular texts or topics that you'd like us to look at, and Laura on Twitter suggested films about religious repression. So we're finally doing it today!
Yay!
This episode, we're going to focus on media with religious LGBT characters, or, well, not necessarily religious LGBT characters with themes of religious repression, homophobic and or misogynistic.
Yeah, and we're going to look at the intersection of faith and sexuality, and it's going to be an interesting time. This is not a topic I spend as much time thinking about as Dee does, but thinking about it... But no, because I know it's something that's very relevant and personal to you. And so for me, thinking about it over the last couple of weeks while we've been preparing for the episode, I've had some realizations about myself. It's been interesting.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, I'll maybe talk about some of them, see what I feel.
Cool. We are going to focus on movies where it's more about Christianity and Islam, because that's how we were raised. I was raised as an Ahmadi Muslim, and Mary...
I was raised as Lebanese Orthodox. Orthodox Christianity, also known as Eastern Orthodox Christianity. It's quite different in a lot of ways, more like modern... I say modern Christianity, I mean like the Christianity that English people have. That's like relatively new compared to Orthodox Christianity. Orthodox Christianity is old.
Thank you. Movies of these topics are interesting to me because a large portion of systematic homophobia, it is influenced by religious beliefs, and the intersection of sexuality and faith is often considered incompatible because so many of the world's oldest religions will preach homophobia, and a huge amount of LGBT people coming to terms with their sexuality are often hindered by religion, like whether they're raised that way or simply because so-called secular Western society is actually super Christian. In Western countries like Australia, I mean. I do want to say this is quite a sensitive topic, so I do want to acknowledge that just like each LGBT person, the way that they interact with faith is going to be unique. With anything that I say about the movies that we discuss, I don't want to judge anyone for that. And I think it takes strength to be LGBT and to be religious. And I also think it takes strength to be LGBT and to walk away from faith as well.
Yeah, two different kinds of strength.
It's hard.
It is hard. Pretty admirable of most religious people anyway, but especially admirable of LGBT people, and even, depending on the faith, women as well. So we're really only talking about the way these movies portray it. We're not trying to judge anyone or tell anyone how they should be acting or anything. And we're also only talking from our perspectives, as we always are anyway, but especially with this.
So I wrote a list of movies that deal with these themes, and Mary sorted them into some really interesting categories.
Yeah, so there are 4 categories, and I sort of sorted them into a sort of spectrum. But the first category I put the movies in is stories where an individual represses their identity as an individual because of their personal religion that they ascribe to, which I shorthanded to individual versus their faith specifically. And
so smart.
The movies in this category are mostly Dee's movies, so I'll let her talk about them.
So I put The History Boys into this category. It's originally a play by Alan Bennett, but it was adapted into a movie by Nicholas Heitner. I want to talk about my favorite character Scripps in that. His thing is that he's extremely religious and has taken a vow of celibacy to God. He did this when he was really young because he thought it was easy because he saw other boys around him having crushes and stuff, and he's like, oh no, this will be cool, like I can do this easily, like I can do this vow to God really easily. But actually later on he kind of realizes that he's maybe the reason that he thought it was easy was because he's not actually straight and he wasn't actually behaving the way that other boys did because he's not straight. So yeah, he is one of my favorite characters in that way because he's really funny, but at least throughout the story he's very principled in this way, which I think is interesting. And there are a few other characters around him that you can compare and contrast with. For instance, his friend Posner is Jewish and is like one of the first characters to like admit that they're gay, but Scripps kind of keeps it bottled up. I think that interestingly this captures maybe one of the reasons why young gay people will be really ignorant of themselves and not realize that they're gay, because like they're so focused on God, because they're living in such a heteronormative society and they don't find themselves having any heteronormative inclinations. They just think, oh yeah, I'm just a super religious, like, you know, child of God. Like yeah, and then of course it gets complicated once they do realize. I
actually went through a phase like this when I was like 13 and 14.
No, I definitely did this.
I was like the super special, the super duper special. I was like, I am gonna be the best damn Christian that anybody has ever seen, man. I'm gonna make my family I even made my family like pray every night together, which we've never done.
Oh my god.
And I was so enthusiastic about the religious education class at my school, overly enthusiastic, that I got an award. I got an award made up for me at the presentation because they
oh, that one.
Because it's a class that's not traditionally like awarded. Anyone gets an award for, but they literally made up an award for me. And I actually looked this up recently. To this day, that award still exists, but I was the inaugural recipient. And it is for enthusiasm in religious studies in my region.
Wow.
There you go.
I think this is also true for a movie like Novitiate. Novitiate is a 2017 film directed by Maggie Betts. It's set in the 60s and it's about young woman who is training to be a nun because, you know, she doesn't feel like any other calling like towards men. So she thinks that she must love God instead. So it's in a Catholic church in the 60s, just before the Vatican revokes the special status of nuns before then. So it's before that big exodus because a lot of women quit being nuns after they were told that, oh, this doesn't make you any more special than anyone else. Her journey throughout that movie is just her realizing that the direction that she pushed her life in was because it never really occurred to her that she could just simply not be in love with men specifically.
Wow, gosh. But I get it, but it's crazy to me.
It is a crazy movie. Yeah, I don't know. It's a pretty movie, definitely. There's loads of like, ooh, hands moments. Can you think of any other ones?
There are a lot of horror films in this category.
Ooh.
I feel like a lot of horror films, even on a subliminal level, deal with an individual versus their faith. But it's not really to do with their sexuality, but it is usually due to repressing desire or something else. But I think we are going to do a separate episode on horror and lesbianism and
Jennifer's Body.
And Jennifer's Body, because there's a lot of gayness in horror. And some of it's good, and some of it's not so good.
I think also vaguely... No, maybe not Saint Maud. Saint Maud's a weird one.
Which one?
Saint Maud.
Oh, is that gay?
Jennifer Ailes' character is a lesbian in that. But the Maud character, who is the saint, is not.
There's a lot of horror movies where it's implied that a person goes against their faith, turns to Satanism, and they become like a lesbian or they become gay. And I see those movies as an individual versus their faith sort of thing.
Okay. Next category.
Our next category is stories where an individual represses their identity because of familial religion. So not necessarily societies and not even necessarily their religion that they ascribe to as an individual, but their families. And I call that individual versus familial, because I think family cultures can very much be defined by religion, even if your family isn't necessarily religious, or even if you yourself aren't religious.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, we've got first up in this category, I Can't Think Straight. Yeah, it's such a nice movie, this movie. It watches like it was made on $10, but that's fine because it had a lot to say and it said all of it really well.
I've mentioned I Can't Think Straight before. It's made by Shamim Sharif. She's an Indian Muslim lesbian, and it's basically a retelling of how she met her wife, who is a Palestinian Christian lesbian. I think I watched this movie when I was like 16, 17, maybe later than that even. But yeah, seeing that movie made me, I feel like it saved my life in a way, because it's like the first movie that I'd ever seen where I saw women with essentially with almost the same background as me coming to terms with their sexuality in that way, and like actually talking about things that I care about and things that affected me. Seeing those conversations being had on screen, it's like, oh my god, like this is this is something that's happened in my family. This is, you know, something that my family member said. And yeah, it's
watching this movie with you. I watched it the first time with you, and I was so excited by the scene where I've forgotten all the characters' names, but the two main girls, I think they're sitting with the rich one's family.
Yeah.
And they are debating the Palestine conflict, and all of them have a different opinion of it. But the opinion is not necessarily like in support, like blind support of Israel or blind support of Palestine. Like it's very nuanced. And I was so excited watching that scene because it's one of those things where if you have lots of brown people, like we can have differing opinions.
Mm-hmm.
And we do have differing opinions. Like, as you said, I've literally been in situations where I've heard my family have these conversations. And it's not as
like
simple
verbatim.
Yeah, verbatim almost. And sitting there, I was like, that's right.
That there can be that many perspectives on it because people are gonna all disagree with each other.
Because everyone does.
Yeah, because everyone does. Another scene that I did like was the coming out scene, even though like it hurts me a lot. The first thing her mom says to her is like, you know, first you stopped going to mosque and now you're this, and like it
Sorry, I shouldn't laugh.
I know. I know. I mean, all I can do is laugh about it, but I think it touches on the way that a lot of Asian parents, especially, or just Asians in general, like they have this attitude now that homosexuality or being trans is like, it's like a Western concept. It's something that white people invented, and it's like, oh, we like sacrificed everything to come to this country so you could have a better life, and how dare you assimilate to these beliefs. And it's like, no, the only reason that you think that is because we were colonized by Europeans that enforced this homophobia and transphobia onto us. Not all the time, but in quite a few instances like that. And it's kind of horrifying now to see the way that older brown people think that being gay is only like something that happens in the West, and that's simply not true. That line where the daughter's like, you know, you always said that you just wanted us to be happy, and the mom's just like, well, I lied.
Ouch.
Next one.
Saturday Church. It's a Christian one, right? I haven't watched it in a little while.
Yeah. By Damon Cardassis. It's about a boy and his family, and then his father dies, and then his aunt comes in to help them, and the aunt is like super religiously Christian.
Yeah, and Ulysses, who's the main character, is, I don't know what he identifies as, but he's definitely gender non-conforming and gay, and he experiences a lot of homophobia from his aunt and
transphobia.
And transphobia too from his aunt, specifically because of her faith, and the movie is called Saturday Church because does he get kicked out or does he just run away? I can't really remember.
It's before he gets kicked out, he meets some trans women, because this movie is set in New York, that he meets some trans women down by the piers and they take him to Saturday Church, which is like a program that they run at this church like once a week to give food to the people that need it, especially LGBT youth.
Yeah, well, it's called Saturday Church because of the program, but I sort of look at it as Ulysses finding a faith in himself and his identity that normally people might have in a god. And it's just a really beautiful film. It is hard to watch in some parts, but it's overall just very beautiful. And the last scene, or maybe the scene before, where his mum comes home and realizes that the auntie has said all these horrible things to him, and you think for one horrible moment that she's going to agree with her or sort of remain silent, but she kicks the auntie out and sits Ulysses down and says, I'm sorry you had to hear any of that. I think it's one of the simplest and most beautiful acceptance. I feel like a lot of movies have like acceptance speeches, but I love how much that simple line says.
Yeah.
About the mum and about how much he loves him, and I think it's really...
Or them.
It's just beautiful. I also like that they make the point that the mum is also Christian, but she doesn't believe in that. She doesn't believe in being cruel to people who are gay or trans.
But she's not like homophobic.
No, but I think a lot of the time people want to write off all Christians as that because Christianity has such a horrible association with being homophobic and transphobic because, well, understandably so, not to mention that a lot of conversion camps are run by Christian groups, and I really like that this movie shows very nuanced themes of faith. I put sex education next because I wanted to briefly talk about Eric. We have talked about Eric, our boy, before, but I think the first season of Sex Education deals pretty head-on with Eric's conflict with his family over his identity as a very flamboyant gay, and it's made very clear that his family's homophobia does stem from their religion in some way. I do think this plotline is dropped really hard in season 2. It's like not...
It is.
But I really love that Eric, you can tell he has a great love for his community, which is very much attached to the church. And so even though he experiences this, hostility and prejudice from his family over his identity and how it doesn't match up with their faith, I love how much Eric still loves
the fact that he holds on to it and cherishes it. I think another thing to note is because Eric is black, he's a person of color in, this super white village that they all live in, and church is probably one of the biggest communities where he can be with other people like him as well. So culture does come into play in that regard.
Absolutely. I love when Raheem's like being really rude and saying like, oh, religion is stupid and all Christians are homophobes, whatever. He's like, you can't seriously like this stuff. And Eric goes, well, actually I love this stuff. Like, this is my family and I love it. I don't think the conflict for him either is as simple as like, oh, I'm going to run away from my family. Because he can't do that and he doesn't want to do that. The next movie I want to talk about in this category, it's actually kind of an anti-version of what we've been talking about in a way. But I did want to briefly talk about My Big Fat Greek Wedding because it was the main movie that I grew up watching where there was a portrayal of Eastern Orthodox families. Or a family, rather. My Big Fat Greek Wedding is written by Nia Vardalos, and it's based on her own family. My main issue with this movie is that at the start of the movie, Nia Vardalos' character is unmarried. She is, looking daggy. She doesn't wear makeup. She doesn't look like Nia Vardalos. I don't know. She's not typically attractive and she's not looking for a husband, and everyone in her family for like the first half an hour of this movie even though she's probably only in her like early 30s. They just grill her for being old and single and not seeking a husband. And I don't know, you would kind of think this movie is going in the direction of her being like, well, I'm gonna do things my own way. But instead, it portrays the idea that once she gives in to that familial culture, which is very much just connected to the Orthodox culture of, doing herself up and looking pretty for men and seeking a husband, she finds fulfillment and love. And once she finds marriage, she's like, oh, she's so happy. And I don't know, even though I love this movie because there's a lot of things in it that remind me of my family, especially like the egg fights at Easter and the baptism scenes and the long ass wedding at the end. Orthodox weddings take so long. They are so long. So there was lots of things like that where I was like, oh yeah, this is how it is. But at the same time, I just felt like, oh, so for all the times that people in my family have essentially like looked down on me for being unmarried and not wanting to be married, like you're telling them that they're right. And all I need to do is actually succumb to all of these things and I'll be happy, which I'm not a fan of. So I do think it's an interesting example of individual versus familial faith, but it's like, I don't know, I feel like the familial faith wins in a very hetero way, I guess. I mean, it is a hetero movie, so I don't know what I expected, but I think it's just also a good example of how familial religion teaches you a lot about the role of your gender, as much as it does about your role in relationships and things. And I don't think that's always a good thing. I realized when I was quite young that I was never going to get married in a Lebanese Orthodox church because the vows that you have to say when you're getting married, like as a woman, are really bad. They are about like serving and obeying and remaining. There's literally a line about remaining silent in it, and it's just not something that I think I'll ever be able to bring myself to say, even if I do love a man and want to marry him.
For me, growing up from a very early age, I would just very confidently say, oh, I'm never going to get married. This was from when I was like 10 years old. I would just confidently tell people like, I don't want to get married ever. Like, why would I want to? Because like the way that I was raised, my parents are both Ahmadi Muslims, but the Ahmadi Muslim community they're a part of is very Pakistani. So the way that my mom raised me was like preparing me for for eventually getting married to a Pakistani man, in that like, I was learning how to like cook all these dishes and clean all these and sew all these things, and I have the skills of like the ultimate stay-at-home wife. Like I really do. Because my mom prepared me in this way. But yeah, from a very young age, I just very confidently decided that I didn't want to do that. Or at least from a very young age, I was like, I don't want to marry like a Pakistani man. Ew.
Well, it's funny you say that because when I was young, like my aunties and uncles would tell me like, oh, you'll marry like a good Lebanese boy. But the only Lebanese boys I knew were like my cousins. And I was like, ew, I'm not going to marry a Lebanese boy. Because I literally didn't know any outside of my own family. So I was...
All the Pakistani boys I knew were dweebs. Like, how am I supposed to... Like, the ones my age, I once brought my bike to the mosque and they stole it from me.
What? Oh my god, no.
You think I'm gonna marry one of those bicycle thief Pakistani boys? And that is why I'm gay.
That was the moment.
That was So yeah, culture is definitely a big thing that I think like gets overlooked when we're talking about religion, like the influence of culture on religion.
Oh yeah.
On like religious communities.
Yeah,
that's
like
a big
the
thing.
Misogyny that exists in Lebanese Orthodox communities is just...
Or the misogyny in Pakistani.
Yeah, it is very much connected to the faith.
And then it's like the misogyny of Pakistani culture being like projected onto Islam, but that's not what Islam is really... it's frustrating, man.
Oh yeah.
The last one that I wrote here was Thelma. This is a big religious repression movie. So Thelma is about like this Norwegian girl who's been raised super religiously her whole life, and she goes to college and she meets this girl that she really likes, and her basically rebelling against her religious upbringing is manifested metaphorically with these supernatural powers that she starts getting. I don't have anything more to say about Thelma other than there's lots of snakes in that movie, so I like it.
Of course you do.
Oh, remember how in our very first episode about Good Omens, I was like, is there anything gayer than religious repression? And you were like, no.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
snakes.
Yeah, true. We haven't got Good
Connecting
Omens
those
on
dots.
this list. Can I just
Bro,
say, like, I
Good
have
Omens
no
is the
idea what
ultimate one
category it
for...
would go into.
It's the ultimate example for the next category.
Oh, good. Okay, well.
Or possibly the last one. No, that brings us to our next category, Mariana.
Which is stories where an individual or individuals represses their identity, or their identity is oppressed because of the dominant religion of their environment. So not just their family's religion, not just maybe their religion, but like the religion that is dominant in the environment where they are. And I've called this category individual versus environmental faith. I feel like most movies about conflict between faith and sexuality are more in this category than any of the others.
There's definitely lots of big overlap with the stuff that we've already discussed in categories, but this is the broadest one.
First one we've got in this category is an Australian movie called The Sapphires, which was made in 2012. You've probably heard of The Sapphires in some way. It's one of the few movies about Aboriginal people that is A, actually good, and B, got like a lot of overseas recognition. It's a true story about 4 Aboriginal women who performed overseas in Vietnam for the soldiers during the Vietnam War. And they were the only Indigenous group of singers to get picked to do this. Indigenous people in Australia are black, so they are 4 black women performing. They made history. Again, this is not necessarily an LGBT film, but it is one of the few movies that I've seen that deals with oppression and repression of Aboriginal faith, of dreaming spirituality. So in case people don't know, in Australia, just a brief context because you do need to know this, in Australia there is a social phenomena known as the stolen generations, not generations, because it's multiple, where the government took Aboriginal children away from their mothers and fathers and communities and relocated them in religious institutions to essentially assimilate them. I mean, it is a common misconception that this only happened with fair-skinned Indigenous kids, but it also did happen with darker-skinned kids as well, because they usually became domestic servants and... Sorry, I say domestic servants. What I really mean is slaves. But yeah, if you were fair-skinned, you were assimilated, you were put into the care of a white family, and you were raised as a white kid. And Shari Seven's character, Kay, has basically grown up this way. She was taken very young when she was about 3 or 4. And the plotline of the movie is the other 3 girls don't really trust her because she's lived as white, so they think she'll treat them the way white people do. But Kay agrees to sing with them because they used to sing a lot as kids. And it's just a really beautiful, her plotline is her like sort of coming back to her culture and realizing like how much was taken from her, and it's very emotional to watch. And in particular, it's her sort of realizing the spiritual rituals that she used to do all the time, but she was forced to forget. I think it's a really beautiful film about how colonization robs Indigenous peoples of their faith and forces another faith on them. The last scene of this movie, literally the final scene of this movie, before the really fun, like, dancey last scene, the last proper scene of the film is Shari Seven's character is Kay getting a smoking ceremony to welcome her back to her country. And it makes me cry every time because, oh, it's so nice. But yeah, The Sapphires is a really beautiful movie, specifically about Aboriginal dreaming and how dreaming and spirituality was basically forced out of a lot of Aboriginal people against their will. There's not a lot of movies about Aboriginal spirituality, and that's one of the few where it's directly addressed.
That's so cool.
I mean, there's also Clever Man, but it's not addressed in the same way, so I won't talk about it. Oh, and the next one we've got is The Half of It. We did a whole episode on The Half of It, but Just briefly, the reason I put half of it in this category is because Ellie is not religious, but because she lives in this religious town, that shapes everyone else's perception of being gay. We talked about that scene where Paul figures out that she's gay and gets like real sad for her. That's a good movie looking at how the culture of a place that is connected to the dominant faith in that place affects you, even if you are not of that faith or not even your family is of that faith. Rafiki! Rafiki is absolutely about the dominant religion of a specific country or of a specific town. Very much. Violently impacting these two girlfriends.
Wajda. Oh, Wajda is one of my favorite films ever. It's by Hefa Mansour. It's one of the first films that's fully shot in Saudi Arabia, and it's just about this little girl. She's going to a school with a bunch of other Muslim girls, but she's not really that into her faith, and she really wants this bicycle, and so she hatches a plan to get it by becoming so good at reading the Quran that she wins a competition where she'll get money to get that bicycle. And I love this movie so much. It's so cute for her. And it really does illustrate repression on your gender, like religious repression as a misogynistic force perfectly, and as a cultural force as well. Also, it's like very subtextual, but there's a moment where these two older girls in her school who are like very close, they get kicked out. And I believe that the implication is that they were caught for being lesbian. It's quite sad, but I like that the film acknowledged that in its small way. As Wajda is reading the Quran, she starts to connect directly with the faith's teachings, and she kind of sees for herself not what she has been taught, like not what's being translated to her, but like what she is actually getting out of it, which I really like. My experience with the Quran as well. It is nice to just think about like what something means to you and not to be told what you're supposed to get out of it.
That is very nice. But I also think that's very hard to do.
It's very difficult.
When you're part of a family that's very much influenced by faith. I think it's very hard to go out on your own and do faith on your own terms in that way.
It takes a lot of effort unlearning what you've already been raised with as well.
My question for you is, there seems to be a lot of, I guess you could call it like a trope with a lot of Muslim characters, is that they only find freedom in their identity, whether that be like their identity as a woman or identity as a person who is gay or trans. Like they only find that by separating from their faith. And I don't know, like how do you feel about those kinds of stories? I follow this hijabi YouTuber, and she talks a lot about how much she hates that trope of like a hijabi falling in love with a white boy and then, you know, removing her hijab for him. And I don't know, do you feel some type of way about how many stories are out there of like, oh, the religion is bad, like it's all bad, and you can only be yourself without it?
Yeah, it's definitely disheartening to see so many stories like this, but the thing about that is, for example, certain sects, not all of them, but some sects of Christianity in the West have been modernizing over the past decades and like starting to be more accepting of LGBT people institutionally. And this is great, obviously, but there are still like problems because often these institutions won't acknowledge the harm and trauma they've caused previously, which is a whole separate issue I'm not going to go into. But I bring it up because this is just not happening in today's Islam. Whether you're Ahmadi, whether you're Sunni or Shia, that kind of thing just isn't happening. So the reason I think that pretty much all stories about LGBT Muslims are like this is because there's still so much pain inflicted on us by these religious institutions. Because there has not been any major movement to open up our communities and to make space for Muslims who aren't straight or cisgender. So there's no space for any kind of happy story that isn't a fantasy. All we have is this pain that we're trying to articulate. I think at this point, if you tried to make a story about this really accepting Muslim community, it might even be offensive because of all the people who are still going through this institutional pain.
Yeah.
Like on a micro level, there are definitely some people with supportive families, and I'm really happy for them, and I welcome stories about them too, but on a larger level, not even a larger level, like just at a masjid level. Masjid means like your local mosque community. It's just not happening yet. Inshallah, obviously. But right now, this is the reason that all these stories end up with LGBT Muslims separating for their faith, or at least their faith's community, because you'd have to be incredibly strong to stay. Not to say that leaving is an act of weakness, it's just as difficult.
I guess it's like a lot of people must feel they have to choose one or the other.
Yeah, a lot of people do feel like that because, particularly in Western countries, the general LGBT community there isn't that pleased with organized religion for obvious reasons, but they're not welcoming to LGBT people who are adamantly religious, especially if you're not Christian. And because it's so hard for LGBT Muslims to articulate where they're at spiritually, they get rejected by the LGBT community unless they abandon religion entirely. So whether you choose that or whether you choose to stay a part of your faith, there's always going to be some kind of assimilation. You're always going to have to sacrifice a part of your identity. Like, I personally don't have the strength to choose either, so I'm just stuck in this weird Islamic limbo, which is where I'm sure a lot of LGBT Muslims are. But yeah, it's a very one or the other situation right now, which is sad. It's definitely something we should talk more about. It's something we shouldn't be afraid of criticizing.
Oh, yeah.
Because it does need to be criticized. It doesn't need to be critiqued by everyone, though. I think we should all stay in our own lanes and allow LGBT Muslims the space to talk about these things. Like, I know Tan France is someone who's trying to do this, but he's also talks about being cut off when he tries to and just not accepted into certain communities because he won't assimilate.
He's so publicly gay as well. It's not like you wouldn't know.
Yeah, there's also the fact that for most public figures like Tan France who are Muslim and openly gay or trans, wider Muslim communities just don't want to acknowledge them anyway. Like, Muslims aren't a monolith, but I mean like the wider Sunni world, they won't even believe us when we say that we're Muslim.
And I also think probably a factor as well is that a lot of Muslims who are LGBT are also not white, and there's and we don't talk about it enough, but there is a lot of racism in the LGBT community, like any community. And also probably, though I can't speak to it, I know that there is a lot of Islamophobia as well, just because there's a lot of Islamophobia in society. So to say that the LGBT community is without it would be an inaccurate statement.
Yeah.
Yes, so do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, not really. Why did you put Easy A on this list?
Why did I put Easy A? Because, well, first of all, because Easy A is a cinematic masterpiece.
It is.
I love Easy A. I love Easy A so much, but it does have a subplot with the gay kid who is her first client. Pretty sure we all know what Easy A is about. But there is a, subplot with that gay kid and how he specifically comes to her because of the amount of homophobia he is experiencing. But it's also made very clear the presence of religious people in this community is very well known. And even though it's presented...
Amanda Bynes.
Yeah, but even though it's presented in a funny way through Amanda Bynes, her influence on the school is made very clear. So the fact that this boy is bullied horrendously because he's gay is directly connected to the culture of the... Where do they live? Ojai? Yeah. There is a direct line drawn between the community of the school and the culture of the school and the presence of Amanda Bynes' character and her religious beliefs. There's a lot of scenes where it's made clear that they're manipulating events in the school. And yeah, so I do think it is an example of an individual versus their environment. He would never have gone...
Yeah.
to Olive had that not been happening. Easy A, while extremely funny and does deal with it in a comedic way more than anything else, does make the point that the homophobia in that community is very much connected to the very evangelical Christian sect that exists in that school. And yeah, that's why Easy A is on the list. Also because I just love Easy A. I actually think it's a very clever movie. Also, for the record, like, a lot of the slut-shaming she experiences in that movie is also from the religious people.
They literally protest her with Bible chapters on their signs.
Yeah, they do. They do. But anyway, that's why I wanted to bring up Easy A. Also, because Stanley Tucci and Patricia Arquette. Is it Patricia Arquette? No, it's not. Who am I talking about?
No, it's Clarkson.
Patricia Clarkson, the other Patricia, the good Patricia.
You think she's the good Patricia?
She's the better Patricia.
I don't know. I don't think there are any good Patricias.
Okay. But yeah,
I'm including Rooney Mara in
her
that.
and Stanley Tucci are like my hippie white parents.
Okay.
I love them. Oh, I know you definitely want to do our next movies.
Oh, we can talk about it together. Okay,
Yeah.
So the next ones are The Miseducation of Cameron Post by Desiree Akhavan and But I'm a Cheerleader by Jamie Babbitt. So these are two different movies about lesbians going to conversion therapy camps, directed by actual lesbians and bi women, which is super cool. Both of them satirize religious conversion therapy, but also in a way that's, I think, still very careful.
Yeah, they make fun of the beliefs of the people that build the camps. They don't make fun of the camps themselves. They make fun of the ideology, but they don't make fun of what actually takes place.
I mentioned this because probably the next major gay conversion therapy movie is Boy Erased by Joel Edgerton, who is an absolute menace that did everything wrong.
And yet people still think it's good.
No one thinks that movie's good. That's like the one solace, is that no one really likes that movie. But yeah, But I'm a Cheerleader is definitely a lot more comical than Cam Post because it's very hyper stylized and just super campy. But the way that it looks at the methods of religious conversion therapy is still really quite daunting and horrifying, like when you actually listen to it, like the way that they'll latch on to certain aspects or certain events that happened in their childhood which were like inconsequential and like twist it on its head and be like, that's why you're gay, you need to like get over it in that way. And like it's really horrifying because you kind of like, conversion therapy is still very much an issue that goes on today. It's still legal in Australia technically, which is horrible. And the tactics that they use, basically manipulating you into thinking a certain way about these aspects of your life as like, you know, an explanation or like the formula, and like as something that you can be cured and like
and something
therapized out of, is really, it's really horrifying.
They treat being gay as like a trauma that has happened to you and that you can be fixed.
The Miseducation of Cameron Post does this in a less campy way. Like, it's still quite funny, very dark, and just very beautiful. The book by Emily M. Danforth definitely goes into Cameron's childhood a lot more. So if you're interested in that, I do recommend the book because it's quite different from the movie. As well as showing these horrifying experiences, it's also kind of like a lamentation or like a love letter towards all the people who lived or are living as ex-gays that survived programs like this. And it's a very big example, like probably one of the most prominent examples of like individuals versus their environmental faith. Because they're literally transported to a very specific environment.
I did say before with the Sapphires that contains an example of a person having their specifically Indigenous or Native spirituality ripped from them because they're placed in an environment that's specifically designed to rip it from them. And the Miseducation of Cameron Post also has a Native American character who we are seeing this happen to them. I don't remember their name, but they're two-spirit.
Adam.
Yeah, I love Miseducation of Cameron Post. I didn't think I'd like it, I'll be honest with you. Mostly because I don't know why. I just was, I don't know, maybe because I was wary films about conversion therapy.
I totally understand anyone that doesn't want to watch it because it's still quite sad.
Yeah.
It's a lot of emotions.
Oh,
that it puts you through.
I don't think Cameron is particularly religious.
No, she's not. In the book, it's very trauma-based, where after the first gay experience that she has, like, at a sleepover at her friend's house, while she's at that sleepover, she comes downstairs and her friend's parents have received a call and they're like, your parents are dead. They die in a car crash. So that's a trauma that she kind of carries with her throughout her life, and she kind of associates her gay activity, her first gay experience, with her parents dying as like a punishment. And this is something that later on at the camp they use against her. It's very horrifying. But in the book, there's a really lovely healing arc that goes specifically into that. The movie makes it a bit more general, but it's still very good.
But nice.
But I'm a Cheerleader is like is super funny. Like, it deals with very serious things, but it's super funny and like very enjoyable to watch, actually. Dante Basco is in it, so the voice of Zuko, so he's a gay icon in that. And it's so good, it's so funny. Unfortunately, RuPaul is in that movie, but you know, it's not that. It's like pre. It's only 1999 then, so. But yeah, I definitely recommend it. It's so iconic.
Anything else you want to say about the conversion therapy?
Not really. Other than ScoMo, get your head out of your ass.
Yeah, we did want to mention that this is practically a genre within itself, like a subgenre. The conversion therapy camp movie, and I mean
there's a movie like that with Jonathan Groff. I know, I forget what it's called. It's like Apple something. Like, it is very much a whole thing because it's very much a really horrible phenomenon. So kind of like what I said about Muslim movies and how there's like still a lot of pain that people want to express. These movies definitely reflect that. The next two I specifically watched for the sake of this episode.
Yeah.
So the first one is Rami. This is a show created by Rami Yusuf. I watched one episode which was directed by Desiree Akhavan. It's an episode where a character that's been present throughout the entire show, Uncle Nassim, who you see being super homophobic and sexist and racist for the entire show. It's like a really quiet episode that focuses on his life and the fact that he is not actually straight. I really wonder what the point of this episode was. I feel like from what I've read about season 2 of Rami, it's Rami Yusuf trying to be more inclusive in a way that I don't think is helpful because he's still only writing from his own perspective. They did bring Desiree Akhavan in to direct this particular episode, and she did elevate the script, but it's not a good script to begin with. Yeah, I don't have a lot to say about it other than Rami Yusuf, stop being so fucking annoying.
Rami Yusuf, and this is maybe a controversial statement because nobody really likes to talk like this, but Rami Yusuf is an example of how white people will greenlight things because of quote-unquote diversity.
Rami Yusuf, the big sick.
Yeah, he's like the
master of none.
He's the reason that white people say, oh, like, we shouldn't have, like, diversity quotas. Because you get, like, stupid shows like this that don't reflect anyone's experiences. Like, I can't believe you told me, like, there's this whole plotline where he's, like, having regular hookups with his cousin. Like, how is this helpful to anyone?
If I start talking about, like, everything that I feel about Rami Yusuf and Rami as a show, like, we're gonna be here all day. But okay, the next thing that I watched for the purpose of this episode was The Bold Type, because The Bold Type is like the only mainstream show on TV, I think, like, ever that has like a Muslim lesbian character played by icon Nicole Bushri, who was in Circumstance, 2011 film.
Iranian legend.
Yes. This is not a good show. I literally
You're like, this is not a good show.
This is not a good show. I specifically only skimmed through for her scenes with Aisha D, who's Australian and super cute. Nicole Bushri's presence in the show in season 1, which came out in 2017, her function was to provide like a commentary on the Trump presidency's immigration policies, because first of all, like, even though we know Nicole Bushri is Iranian, they don't actually ever specify what country her character is from. So they kind of just talk about the Middle East in a super vague way, which I found really weird. Also, like, they don't actually explore the way that her lesbianism intersects with her religion, which is super weird to me that well, no, it's not super weird in that because they obviously think that those identities are incompatible, but they're still like, tick, tick, we need a reason why a Middle Eastern person wouldn't want to be in their country so that we can talk about immigration. So I feel like they just made her a lesbian for that purpose. It's very strange to me. They'll bend over backwards to avoid it and kind of only talk about these things separately. Yeah, The Bold Type is not a good show. It's not. It's so ironic that like the main white girl character has a whole arc where she's learning about intersectional feminism, but like the actual women of color in this show, like don't even understand the different racial dynamics between them, and like there's this older mentor lady that like teaches them about the fact that that Aisha D and Nicole Bushry's character face different kinds of racism. It's
this is what
I've only skim watched season 1 and 2, so maybe it improves, but like I just gotta say, like for 2 whole seasons for a show to not actually even touch on this vaguely is super weird to me.
From what you've described about The Bold Type to me as you've been watching it, it's like they get like frustratingly close to actually trying to do something with this, but then they jump backwards and they're like, oh, we can't deal with that, one thing at a time. As if all these things don't coexist anyway.
But yeah, The Bold Type is a shit show, and just rest in peace to the Willower that are watching it solely for the Willower content.
That's our 4th and final category, ladies and gentlemen.
But there is like a miscellaneous one.
There is
not really miscellaneous. It's very specific, actually.
Yep, but our final category on the spectrum, if you like, is oppressive religious dystopias, which is essentially the individual or individuals versus society's enforcement of faith. And in this category, I've V for Vendetta, because, you know, V for Vendetta is like, it slaps. But
V
like,
is so good. V is just a trans icon.
About how this alt-right society has specifically targeted
alt-right. It's like a totalitarian.
Oh yeah, I couldn't think of the word. But yeah, authoritarian, totalitarian, ultra-religious
fascist
government
state.
Yeah, has deliberately targeted undesirables and imprisoned them and experimented on them. The next one on this list, The Handmaid's Tale. In the show, there is a very specific plotline with these lesbians and how the uprising of Gilead, of the state of Gilead, slowly stripped lesbians of basically their citizenship. One day we will do an episode where we just talk about like dystopian and speculative fiction, because we both love it. But that's not today, but they're the 2 big ones in this category. But the third biggin, we're going back to the beginning, folks.
To our roots.
Back to our roots. And that is Good Omens. Why is Good Omens in this category, D?
Because it's like Armageddon, so I'm putting it in dystopia, but also like because of the fantasy element of it.
True.
It's like a fantasized Bible fanfic.
It really is. And also like the way the angels and the demons enforce their beliefs on Crowley and Aziraphale to specifically stop them from being in love with each other. I mean, that's not like canon, but it also is.
Yeah. We talk about that.
Yeah, we've talked about that.
We've talked about this, okay?
Episode.
But yeah, Good Omens is the last one. Do you have any final thoughts?
My final thoughts is actually I've realized that there are very little films that specifically address either of what I grew up around specifically. Like, of course, there are a lot of films about Christianity in general, but not much about, like, Orthodox Christianity. There's very little about Aboriginal dreaming, spirituality, for lots of reasons. For a lot of reasons. And a lot of those reasons is because a lot of those teachings are lost and can't get them back. But yeah, I realized, like, trying to research for this episode, how very little I could talk about in terms of representation, and how I suppose that's a good thing in some ways, in that I never had movies telling me how I should interact with my faith, which was sort of good. Which meant that, you know, my perceptions of my faith came mostly from my family and people of my faith that I knew in real life. But that also had problems of its own. Who knows, maybe one day I'll make a film about an Orthodox Christian person dealing with stuff that's not a spoofy comedy like My Big Fat Greek Wedding.
For me, like, it's kind of the same. I was raised Ahmadi Muslim, which is a very minor denomination of Islam that's very different to most Islam. Like, I can relate in a very general sense to the Sunni experiences that I've seen in movies, but not really. These movies that I've talked about, there's only bits and pieces that I've kind of jigsawed together into something that I can relate to, but really, like, there's been nothing. Maybe I'll write about it.
Have you ever wanted to write a Muslim character?
I mean, technically I did just do that.
Oh yeah, you did.
It's definitely something that fascinates me because I was raised so religiously that even if I'm looking in a general sense, or even if I'm looking at something that's not even the same religion that I grew up in, there are so many key similarities that we can all relate to, I think, because, yeah, as we said in the beginning, so much systematic homophobia is influenced by religious belief. So these are definitely really important stories that we should be telling, and there should definitely be a huge variety of stories like the ones that we've mentioned and more of them, so that way we can get like a more accurate picture of what it is like.
I also wish that religion wasn't such a taboo to address in films. Like I was just
still
thinking,
very taboo.
I think about how many movies when you analyze them in English class do they tell you, like, this is a religious analogy, and you like, and you know, it'll be like the friggin' Matrix or something. Popular culture has a weird obsession with, like, looking for religious themes in movies that aren't explicitly about anything religious, but then when it comes to actual religious films, they're like, I do not see it.
Yeah.
Like, literally, they don't go and see it. And the only religious films they do see...
Pretty much everything we've discussed, nearly everything that we've discussed today is indie.
Like, I can't think of a mainstream film about religion that's directly about religion, except for maybe Narnia, but it's so wrapped in fantasy that most people don't even know that that's what it is. We will find a God analogy in anything, but God forbid, like, we should actually look at things that are about
Look at it straight
God.
on.
Actually, I think this explains why I was maybe, like, very obsessed with, like, the Prince of Egypt and Joseph, King of Dreams.
Oh, dude, I love... Prince of Egypt is the best movie ever made.
Yeah.
But yeah, my final thoughts are stream Prince of Egypt and also Moderation by Florence and the Machine.
Oh, yeah. Like, our title for this episode is Do I Look Moderate to You, which is a lyric from Moderation by Florence and the Machine.
Thank you for listening, guys.
You know the socials by now, but in case you don't, we are at gayv_club. Give us a follow. Be safe, as always. We'll see you guys next time. Be safe. Watch or consume something you enjoy. And, yeah, bye from us.
See you. Bye.